In 2018, the Alberta Utilities Commission convened an inquiry into the modernization of the Alberta power grid. The inquiry's report was released several weeks ago, and to discuss the report, we're joined by Dr. Blake Shaffer, professor of economics at the University of Calgary. So welcome to the interview, Blake.
Thank you, Markham. Good to be here.
Look, I've done interviews with many experts in North America and Europe, and the new technologies, new policies are revolutionizing the utility industry, the power systems to greater or lesser extent, depending on where jurisdiction you're talking about. And it seems like this inquiry was set up to begin the process of considering how Alberta should do that. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, it seems so. They're evident that the world is changing. The utility of the future looks different than the utility of yesteryear or today. And so this was to get broad stakeholder input and try to understand, those changes and really to come up with what do we need to think about changing in terms of modernization.
What's your take? I know you do a lot of work in the electricity economics. What's your take on the recommendations that came out of the inquiry?
Well, I'll be frank with you. I've only just started reading through the 167 pages, but I would say two things about the report. One, I mean, this is a good read. There's a lot of really interesting components here. There's a real grasp of the challenge. I really enjoyed reading this report. And I don't say that often about a 160-page utility commission report. In terms of the recommendations, though, it doesn't seem like there's that much follow through in terms of tangible follow through at this point. I think it's sort of, a long study to determine that we need a little bit more study. So there was a discussion about, next steps, but there wasn't any. If people were looking for concrete actions, such as rate design changes or the installation of advanced metering infrastructure, smart meters, there isn't anything like that as far as I could tell. And again, I'm just reading this through the first time today, but it did set the stage, though, I think, for that. It did set the stage. It's just there clearly wasn't consensus. And so I think there's, they're waiting to do more.
One of the things that I've been told by utility executives when I interview them is that in Alberta, there isn't the same pressure to change and to change as quickly as there is in other jurisdictions. There isn't the same penetration of wind and solar and batteries. There isn't the same regulatory pressure. Alberta's already undertaken a lot of its market and systems change. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair assessment. We don't have the same level of penetration of distributed energy resources nor electric vehicles. And they speak to that. I think that's a fair comment. It is one of those things, though, the future can catch up on you quickly. And so it is worth being proactive rather than waiting for us to get into that situation. They do talk in the end, though, about triggers with which where, technology or regulatory or market concerns would warrant taking real concrete action and then what those enabling conditions might be. So they do have this in mind. I think we're in a good position in terms of being able to monitor what's going on in other jurisdictions that will understandably lead the way here. But I think Alberta's setting itself up for change in the future for sure.
Is there any discussion, and this may be an unfair question because you haven't gone through the entire report, but I'm very curious about discussions around a greater integration of BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, maybe even Manitoba into a regional market, electricity market. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, there is some of these. So, I would say they break it down into kind of three main things they want to look at. So one is the technology side. We don't have the smart meters that you have in BC to enable some of the things that we need to do in terms of controlling and managing and distributed energy and flexible demand. That's technology. One is financial or rates. We don't have the incentives to have a lot of these things. So getting those rates more aligned with cost causation and variable, that's another thing we don't have. But the third pillar, I guess, that they had in there was a regulatory aspect, which was about greater integration of the regulatory system. So they do talk about between the different distribution companies, but also and the transmission facility operators, but also between the AESO and other neighboring jurisdictions. So it definitely was mentioned, which was nice to see.
And any other final thoughts, Blake?
Well, it's a long quote, but I thought this quote on page 16 by Dr. Faroukhi of Battle Group, and Dr. Faroukhi's been kind of, I guess, the go-to person on time of use or demand response. And he says, I think everyone is on the same page that change is coming. And even though it may not be evident today in Alberta, it's extremely likely that in the next 5 to 10 years, the landscape will look very different. So he goes on to say, the utility will have to redefine its relationship with its customers. So it'll have to reinvent itself. And he talks about the need to become customer centric. I use a line in my class that I'm pretty sure I borrowed from somewhere, which is that the old world was forecasting demand and dispatching supply. And it's becoming very evident that the new world with more renewables out there is going to be about forecasting supply and dispatching demand. So we need all the things they're talking about really well in this report, which is using technology, using smart rates to really engage the customer, and get flexibility and get them involved in the market. And we'll have to find ways to do that, seamless ways that don't bother them too much. But it talks a lot about that, but there's very little bite in terms of actually doing anything about it at this point in time.
Blake, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
You betcha. Thanks.